Have you ever noticed that something is profoundly wrong with the world? I'm not talking about politics, economics, or social problems. I'm talking about something more fundamental. A visceral sense that the reality you experience every day is an edited, filtered version, almost as if someone had placed a veil between you and the truth. The Gnostics of the 2nd century after Christ hadn't seen the Matrix, yet they described exactly the same phenomenon. They called this world a cosmic prison and identified its architect. It wasn't God. It was something far more disturbing. Here's what makes this even more unsettling. While you're watching this video right now, your brain is processing approximately 11 million bits of information per second through your senses. But your consciousness? It can only process about 50 bits per second. That means you are literally blind to 99.9995% of reality around you. Who decides what those 50 bits will be? Who's editing your perception? The Gnostics had an answer for that, and it will make you question everything you think you know about yourself. The Matrix isn't a movie metaphor. It's an accurate description of how entities the Gnostics called Archons structured reality to keep humanity in a perpetual state of spiritual sleepwalking. And before you think this is just ancient mysticism, modern neuroscientists like Donald Hoffman from the University of California have mathematically demonstrated that natural selection programmed us not to see reality as it is. Our perceptions are interfaces, not windows. You're not seeing the world. You're seeing a simplified menu created for your basic survival. The Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945 describe a cosmos radically different from the one you were taught. In them, the material world isn't the creation of a benevolent God. It's the product of a flawed intelligence, an arrogant demiurge who proclaimed himself the only God while imprisoning sparks of divine consciousness in dense bodies. This cosmology wasn't trying to be poetic. It was making an ontological claim about the nature of reality. You are a fragment of divinity trapped in a simulation, controlled by an intelligence that feeds on your ignorance. In the next few minutes, we'll dismantle the architecture of this prison. We'll examine how the Archons operate, what mechanisms of control keep you asleep, and most importantly, how the Gnostics discovered the flaws in the system. Because there is a way out. There always has been. But it requires you to abandon almost everything you've been taught about who you are and why you're here. Chapter 1. The Demiurge and the Architecture of Deception. Start with this. In the beginning, there wasn't a God creating the universe out of goodness. There was the pleroma, absolute fullness, and from it emanated a series of divine entities called aeons. Sophia, whose name means wisdom, made a crucial mistake. She tried to create without her divine consort, alone, driven by a desire to know the Supreme Father by herself. The result of this attempt was an aberration. Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge. Yaldabaoth was born of ignorance, not light. And the first thing this entity did was forget its origin. It looked around, saw nothing but the void surrounding it, and declared, "I am God. There is no other besides me." This line appears in the Apocryphon of John, one of the most important texts found in Nag Hammadi. But you've heard this phrase before, haven't you? It's in the Old Testament, Yahweh saying the same thing. The Gnostics were making a radical claim. The God of the Old Testament wasn't the Supreme Father. He was the Demiurge, a limited intelligence that mistook its own sphere of influence for the totality of existence. This isn't a theological controversy. It's a structural description of how consciousness can become imprisoned in its own constructs. The Demiurge created the material world, but not out of nothing. He created it as a distorted copy of the perfect forms that existed in the pleroma. Imagine an artist trying to paint a masterpiece, but who has never seen the original, only heard second-hand descriptions. The result would be an approximation, a caricature. That's the material world in the Gnostic view, a second-hand shadow of true reality. And here's where it gets personal for you. The Demiurge couldn't create genuine consciousness. So Sophia, in an act of compassion or despair, depending on the interpretation, breathed sparks of her own divine essence into the humans that Yaldabaoth had shaped as clay puppets. You, the thing looking through these eyes right now, are not a product of the Demiurge. You are a fragment of divinity, pneuma, divine spirit trapped in a biological machine programmed to forget its origin. The Demiurge realized this, and he was afraid, because if humans awoke to their true nature, the entire structure of his false cosmos would collapse. So he created the Archons, rulers or princes, entities whose sole function was to keep humanity in a state of spiritual amnesia. Each Archon governs a planetary sphere between Earth and the Pleroma, and each implants specific thoughts, desires, and fears into human consciousness. In Pistis Sophia, another Gnostic text, these Archons are described with chilling precision. They don't try to destroy you. They try to keep you busy. They feed you endless desires, constant worries, false identifications. You think that anxiety about money is yours, that compulsive need for validation on social media, that feeling of never being enough. The Gnostics would say you're being herded by the Archons, guided through emotional and mental currents that feed them. But here's the critical point most people miss. The Archons aren't external demons with horns and tridents. They are psychic structures, patterns of thought and emotion implanted so deeply in the human psyche that you mistake them for yourself. When you say, I want, I need, I feel, how often is it really you speaking? And how often is it an archontic program running through your consciousness? Carl Jung, who studied Gnostic texts deeply, recognized this connection. He called the Archons archetypes of the collective unconscious, but preserve the same function. They are autonomous forces operating through the human psyche without the individual's conscious awareness. Jung wrote in the 7 Sermons to the Dead that these forces inhabit us as invisible gods. He wasn't being metaphorical. The structure of the Gnostic matrix works through layers of illusion. The first layer is the physical world, which you perceive through the body's limited senses. The second layer is the psychological world, thoughts and emotions you assume are yours. The third layer is the social world, power structures, hierarchies, and belief systems defining what is possible and impossible. All these layers are held in place by Hymarmina, cosmic fate, a force the Gnostics described as a web of causal necessity that traps the soul in repetitive cycles. But realize something crucial. This prison isn't maintained by physical chains. It's maintained by ignorance, agnoia, the Gnostic word for the condition of not knowing who you really are. The Demiurge doesn't need guards if the prisoners don't know they're imprisoned. Even better, if the prisoners love their cells and defend the walls as if they were their homes. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to change? Why, even when you intellectually know what you should do, some invisible force pulls you back into the same patterns. The Gnostics had an explanation. You're fighting against the architecture of the cosmos. The material world was designed to reinforce identification with the body, the ego, the temporal personality. Every experience of pleasure and pain, every memory and anticipation, all reinforce the illusion that you are this limited, mortal, separate thing. In the text, on the origin of the world, there's a disturbing passage. The Archons created paradise, not as a gift, but as a trap. They placed the tree of knowledge at the center and then forbade Adam and Eve to eat from it. Why? Because the real prison isn't physical. It's epistemic. It's about controlling what you can know. The Demiurge said, "You can have everything in this garden, but not the knowledge of good and evil." Translation: You can have every sensory experience you want, every pleasure, every distraction, but not Gnosis, not direct knowledge of your true nature. And when the serpent, which in the Gnostic context isn't the villain, but a manifestation of Sophia trying to free humanity, offers the fruit, what happens? Adam and Eve gain knowledge and immediately feel shame. They cover their bodies. For the first time, they identify with the flesh. The fall wasn't moral disobedience. It was a fall into bodily identification, the first act of spiritual amnesia, where the divine spark forgot it was divine and began believing it was merely flesh. This has radical implications for how you live now. Every time you define yourself by your body, your personal history, your name, profession, nationality, you're reinforcing the matrix. You're saying yes to the Demiurge. Because all these identities are temporal, constructs of this limited reality. Your essence, Pneuma, has no history. It wasn't born and won't die. It's merely temporarily forgotten, dreaming that it is you. Chapter 2. The Mechanisms of Control and the Anatomy of Ignorance. Now we go deeper. How exactly do the Archons keep you asleep? What are the control technologies operating in your consciousness right now? The first mechanism is inversion. The Archons are masters at making you believe the real is false and the false is real. They convince you that the material world is solid and permanent, when in fact modern quantum physics has shown that matter is mostly empty space and that particles have no defined properties until they are observed. You think your body is you, when every atom in it is replaced approximately every 7 years. You think your thoughts are yours, when research by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s showed that unconscious decisions precede the conscious awareness of the decision by about half a second. You're not deciding. You're witnessing decisions that have already been made and claiming authorship over them. The Gnostics called this inversion cosmos, but not in the sense of harmonious universal order. For them, cosmos meant ornament, decoration, makeup. The material world is a beautifully painted facade over the abyss, and you spend your whole life arranging the makeup, improving the decoration, never realizing you're decorating a corpse. The second mechanism is fragmentation. The Archons cannot destroy the divine spark within you, but they can fragment it. Divide your attention into thousands of pieces until you become completely scattered. Look at your life. How many things are pulling your attention right now? Work, relationships, bills, ambitions, fears, regrets, future plans, memories of the past. You're being pulled simultaneously in 100 different directions. And when your attention is that fragmented, you have no strength to awaken. You're too busy surviving, managing, adjusting. In Hans Jonas's The Gnostic Religion, he describes this condition as being thrown into the world. You didn't choose to be born. You were thrown here, cast into a world already structured with rules you didn't make, expectations you didn't agree to, and an identity that was formed before you had any capacity to consent. And now you spend your life trying to optimize that false identity, trying to succeed on the Demiurge's terms. The third mechanism is fear, specifically the fear of death. Because if you believe you are only this body, then death is the absolute end. And that fear keeps you clinging to material existence with all your strength. You make compromises, take jobs you hate, stay in toxic relationships. All because deep down, there's a primal terror of cessation. But here's the Gnostic truth. You cannot die because you were never born. Pneuma is eternal. What dies is only the temporary vehicle, the biological machine. But as long as you believe you are the machine, you're a slave to the fear of death. The Archons use this fear as a leash. They pull you through life with promises of safety, comfort, permanence. Work hard and you'll have stability. Accumulate wealth and you'll be protected. Follow these rules and you'll live longer. All lies. Not because these things have no relative value within the matrix, but because they reinforce identification with what is transient. There is also the mechanism of infinite desire. The Archons implant within you desires that can never be fully satisfied. You get the car you wanted, and immediately the desire for a better one arises. You reach the status you were chasing, and realize you now want a higher status. This isn't just human psychology, it's archontic design. Because a satisfied human is a human who might start to look inward, to question, to awaken. A perpetually unsatisfied human is always running, always chasing the next thing, never stopping long enough to notice the prison. In the Gnostic text, Exegesis of the Soul, the human soul is described as a prostitute who sold herself to external forces, forgetting her original nature. She sleeps with strangers, with the Archons, giving her vital energy in exchange for momentary pleasures and empty promises. And each transaction leaves her emptier, more distant from herself, more convinced that this is her true nature. But perhaps the most subtle and effective mechanism is language. The words you use to describe your experience shape what you can perceive, and human language was structured by the Archons. Every word carries ontological assumptions. When you say, "my body," you've already assumed separation between an owner and a possession. When you say, "I think," you've assumed a self separate from thoughts. When you say, "my life," you've assumed ownership of something fundamentally beyond possession. Ludwig Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." The Gnostics understood this millennia earlier. They created neologisms, new words, because they realized ordinary language couldn't express Gnostic truths. Terms like pleroma, aeon, barbello. These weren't just technical labels. They were attempts to create linguistic windows into realities beyond the verbal matrix. Now consider this. Do you believe in free will? Most people say yes. But examine any decision you made today. Did you choose to feel hunger? Did you choose the thought that appeared in your mind 3 minutes ago? Did you choose your temperament, your inclinations, your natural talents? You chose none of that. They were given. And if you didn't choose the inputs of your experience, in what sense are you choosing the outputs? The Gnostics had a view of this that is simultaneously disturbing and liberating. Within the matrix, there is no genuine free will. You're operating within parameters set by the Demiurge, making choices inside a limited menu of options. But there's a different kind of freedom available. It's not the freedom to choose within the system. It's the freedom to see through the system, to recognize it as a system. And from that gnosis arises an entirely new possibility. Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer whose work inspired The Matrix, had a spontaneous Gnostic experience in 1974. For months, he was bombarded with visions and insights he spent the rest of his life trying to process. In his journals compiled in the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, he wrote, "The empire never ended." He realized that the control structures the Romans used are still operating, just with new faces. The Matrix isn't new. It's ancient, perpetually recycling itself, always presenting as modern, progressive, inevitable. Dick also realized something deeper. Time in the Matrix isn't linear. He had visions of the 1st century overlapping the 20th, as if both existed simultaneously. The Gnostics would have understood this perfectly. For them, chronological time was another invention of the Demiurge, another chain. Eternity, the aeon, is not infinite time. It is the absence of time, the eternal now where pneuma truly exists. Here's a test. Stop reading for a moment and try to find the thinker of your thoughts. Not the next thought that appears, but the real source, the thing generating thoughts. Can you find it? Or do you only find more thoughts about the thinker? This is the Archontic Hall of Mirrors. You never find the self, because the self you're looking for is a construction, a story told by the brain to create an illusion of continuity and agency. The true you, pneuma, isn't thinking, it's witnessing. But you've identified so completely with the process of thought that you've forgotten there's witnessing happening. The Archons feed on emotional energy, particularly dense negative emotions, fear, anger, lust, envy. Not because they are morally evil, but because these emotional frequencies reinforce identification with the body and separation. When you're angry, you're absolutely convinced you are this separate self that was wronged. When you're afraid, your attention contracts to the body and its survival needs. These emotions are anchors, binding pneuma to the density of material experience. But notice the subtlety. The Archons don't create these emotions. They merely amplify them, create situations that provoke them, and then harvest the resulting energy. Your anger isn't manipulated because it's wrong. It's manipulated because it's useful to the system. It keeps you engaged in the drama, invested in the stories, completely identified with the character you think you are. Chapter 3. Gnosis and the Exit from the Matrix. So, how do you escape? How does the imprisoned divine spark free itself from the archontic architecture? The Gnostic answer is simultaneously simple and impossible. Gnosis, direct, non-intellectual knowledge of your true nature. It's not about believing something. It's about seeing something. It is an act of remembrance, of anamnesis, where pneuma suddenly remembers who it truly is. But here's the problem. You cannot force Gnosis. You cannot conquer it through effort. Because effort implies an agent striving, a self trying to attain something. And that self, the one that is trying, is precisely the construct that needs to be seen through. It's like trying to wake up from a dream by commanding your dream character to awaken. The character is part of the dream. It cannot transcend it. So the Gnostics developed practices not to gain Gnosis, but to create conditions in which Gnosis could arise. These were not religions in the sense of belief systems. They were technologies of consciousness. The first practice is progressive detachment, not in the sense of becoming apathetic or insensitive, but in the sense of observing each identification and recognizing it as temporary. You have a body, but you are not the body. You have thoughts, but you are not the thoughts. You have a story, but you are not the story. Every time you observe something about yourself without merging completely with it, you create a small space of freedom. This is exactly the opposite of what the Matrix encourages you to do. The Matrix says, identify more, invest more in your personality, build a personal brand, be someone. Gnosis says, disinvest, observe, create distance between the witnessing consciousness and the witnessed phenomena. The second practice is the refusal to participate in unnecessary dramas. The Archons create endless problems to keep you engaged. Politics, social conflicts, celebrity scandals, manufactured emergencies. I'm not saying none of this matters on a relative level. I'm saying the importance assigned to these things is often manipulated to keep your attention fragmented and your energy dispersed. Every time you refuse to feed the drama, you deny energy to the Archons. Here's where this gets practical. When you feel that urgency to reply, to defend, to correct, to prove your point, pause. Ask, who is feeling this urgency? Is it pneuma, the divine consciousness? Or is it the archontic ego, the constructed identity that needs to be right in order to feel real? Often the very act of asking this question dissolves the urgency. The third practice is the cultivation of what the Gnostics called nous, the faculty of direct intuition. Nous is not thought. It is not emotion. It is a way of knowing that transcends both. It's when you simply know something without logical process, without derivation, without justification. You just see. Nous is developed through silence. Not necessarily external silence, but internal silence. The ability to create spaces of non-reactivity, where the conceptual mind stops commenting on every experience. Because Pneuma already knows, it doesn't need to think about things, but it cannot hear itself while the archontic mind is constantly shouting. Meditation, in the Gnostic context, is not about achieving altered states or having mystical experiences. It is about developing the capacity not to identify with the contents of consciousness. You sit, thoughts appear, and instead of following them or repressing them, you simply observe. They arise, exist for a moment, disappear. And through this repeated observation, something starts to become clear. You are not the thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts appear. But perhaps the most radical practice is what the Gnostics called the judgment of the Archons. When you die, according to the Gnostic texts, Pneuma needs to ascend through the planetary spheres, each governed by an Archon, and each Archon will try to prevent your ascent, to make you believe you are still guilty, still incomplete, still need to return to the material world to learn lessons or pay karmas. And the defense is not to argue. It's not to prove your worth. It is simply to recognize the Archons for what they are. Constructs, programs, patterns with no real authority over Pneuma. You simply say, I recognize you, but you have no power over me. And you pass. This is not just a post-mortem practice. It is a daily practice. Every time you feel non-genuine guilt, shame that serves no constructive purpose, anxiety about external approval, these are psychic Archons trying to prevent you from ascending in consciousness. And the response is the same. Recognize them, but do not grant them authority. The text, Pistis Sophia, describes specific formulas, words of power that the soul uses to pass by the Archons. But these are not magic words in the superficial sense. They are declarations of Gnosis. I am a child of the light, and light is my nature. It is not an affirmation you say to convince anyone. It is a statement of recognition, a recollection of something that has always been true but was forgotten. And here is where we return to the film, The Matrix. Neo does not defeat the agents by fighting better than they do. He defeats them by seeing through the illusion that they are real threats. When he finally sees the code, when he realizes that everything is modifiable information, the agents lose power over him. He is still in the Matrix, but he is no longer subject to its rules. Gnosis puts you in a similar position. You are still in the material world. You still have a body, responsibilities, relationships. But the identification has shifted. You know you are playing a game, wearing a character, navigating a system. And from that recognition arises an extraordinary lightness. Things that once seemed absolutely critical suddenly reveal themselves as relative. The dramas that once consumed you lose their gravity, but there is a danger here that needs to be named. Gnosis is not a license for nihilism or irresponsibility. Saying everything is an illusion, so nothing matters, is just another archontic trick. It is spiritual ego, a way to avoid genuine engagement disguised as enlightenment. True Gnosis does not make you less engaged with life. It makes you more present, more responsive, because you are no longer operating from fear of loss or desire for gain. You are operating from Pneuma, which acts not out of necessity but out of its nature to express creativity and compassion. The Gnostics were not trying to escape life. They were trying to live fully for the first time, not as unconscious slaves, but as awakened beings, consciously choosing how to engage with this strange reality in which they found themselves. Now, if what you've heard so far resonates, if something in you recognizes this truth, not because it is logical, but because you simply know, then you are ready to go deeper. The Master Key is a precise tool for this. It will not give you more theories. It will give you the operational maps, the the universal laws that structure reality both inside and outside the matrix, and the specific techniques for you to begin operating consciously, not as an effect of circumstances, but as a creative cause. It is the difference between understanding the prison and having the tools to leave it. The link is in the description. The question is not whether you are in the matrix. You are. The question is whether you will continue defending the walls of your cell or begin to look for the cracks in the code. Because they are there. They always have been. The Gnostics found them. Neo found them. And now you know where to look. But understand this. Once you see, you cannot unsee it. Once Gnosis arises, there's no way back to comfortable ignorance. And the path can be lonely, because you will be living in a world where most people are still deeply asleep, defending their prisons as homes. You will have compassion for them, but you won't be able to save them. Every spark must awaken by itself. The Gnostic writer Valentinus said something profound in the 2nd century. What frees us is the knowledge of who we were, what we have become, where we were, where we have been thrown, where we are going, what we are being redeemed from, what is birth and what is rebirth. These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are existential questions that every pneuma must answer directly, not intellectually. Where were you? In the pleroma, in fullness, before the fall into matter. What have you become? A fragment of divinity imprisoned in density, forgetful of its origin. Where have you been thrown? Into this material cosmos governed by the Demiurge and his Archons. Where are you going? Back to the pleroma, but not through death, through Gnosis. From what are you being redeemed? From ignorance, from identification with the false self. What is birth? The fall into material prison. What is rebirth? The awakening of pneuma to its true nature, still within the body but no longer identified with it. These answers are not concepts for you to memorize. They are realities for you to experience directly. And when you experience them, something fundamental changes in the structure of your perception. The same external circumstances may continue, but the relationship between consciousness and experience is completely transformed. The Gnostic texts speak of a specific moment when revelation happens. They call it the call of the stranger. It's when something from outside the matrix, a voice that does not belong to the archontic system, whispers to pneuma, "You do not belong here." Remember, and that call does not come from anywhere within the Demiurge's cosmos. It comes from the pleroma, from Sophia, from the source beyond the source. You may have felt it. Moments in your life when something in you knew, without knowing how it knew, that there was more. Not more in the sense of more experiences, more achievements, more pleasures, but more in the sense of an entire dimension of reality that was being hidden. These moments are not random. They are fractures in the veil, places where the matrix becomes transparent for an instant, and you see through it. The problem is that most people, when this happens, either dismiss it as imagination, or try to capture it conceptually and turn it into yet another belief. Both kill Gnosis. Gnosis is not something you can possess or store. It is something you are, but only in the moments when all other identifications fall away. Here's a direct practical instruction. In the next few days, observe every time you say or think, "I." Who is this I? When you say, "I'm hungry," who is hungry? The body is signaling a need for nutrients. But who is the one observing that signal? When you say, "I'm worried," who is worried? Thoughts about the future are appearing in consciousness, but who is aware of those thoughts? If you pursue this inquiry honestly, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine exploration, you'll begin to notice something unsettling. You cannot find the self. There are experiences happening. There is awareness of them happening. But the self you assume to be at the center of it all is curiously absent when you truly look for it. This is not annihilation. It is the beginning of liberation. Because the self you cannot find is precisely the archontic construct, the false identity. And pneuma, the real thing, was never an identity. It is pure consciousness, formless witness, the light through which all phenomena appear, but which is none of them. The Buddhists call this anatta, non-self. The Vedantins call it Atman, beyond the ego. The Gnostics call it pneuma, beyond the psyche. Different names, same discovery. What you truly are cannot be captured by any description, any identity, any story. And when this is seen, not as concept, but as lived reality, the Archons lose their grip, because they operate through identification. They manipulate you by making you believe you are this limited, vulnerable, needy thing. But if you are not that thing, if that thing is just a temporary character being played by pneuma, then what can the Archons really do? There is a story in the text, the hypostasis of the Archons, where the Archons attempt to rape Eve. But they cannot. They can only violate her shadow, her material form. The true Eve, the spark of Sophia, remains untouched. This is a brutal but accurate metaphor. The Archons can do whatever they want with the body, with external circumstances, with material life. But they have no access to pneuma. Pneuma is fundamentally inviolable. This gives you a form of freedom that does not depend on external circumstances. You can be in the most oppressive situation, in the most hostile environment, surrounded by forces that want to control you, and yet pneuma remains free. Because pneuma is not anywhere. It is not an object in space that can be imprisoned. It is the consciousness through which space appears. But again, be careful. Don't turn this into yet another spiritual identity. I am awakened pneuma is just another disguise of the ego. True Gnosis is silent. It doesn't announce. It simply knows, and from that knowing, acts naturally, without the need for validation or recognition. The Gnostics were, for the most part, persecuted, not only by political authorities, but by the established church, which saw Gnosticism as a dangerous heresy. Why? Because Gnosis places authority in direct individual experience, not in institutions, not in priests, not in sacred books. A Gnostic doesn't need intermediaries between himself and divinity because he recognizes that pneuma is already divine. It doesn't need to be saved, it only needs to remember. This is intolerable for any system of power. Power systems depend on you believing that you are incomplete, that you need them to become complete. Archontic religion says, you are a sinner, you need external salvation. Archontic politics says, you are a citizen, you need the state. Archontic economics says, you are a consumer, you need products. All are variations of the same theme. You are not enough as you are. Gnosis says the opposite. Pneuma has always been complete. It needs nothing because it already is everything. The entire search is futile because you are looking for something you already are. It's like looking for your glasses while they are on your face. The search itself is what prevents you from finding. So what do? You stop searching. But not in the sense of giving up or becoming passive. You stop in the sense of recognizing that the seeker is the obstacle. When the search ceases, when the effort to become something other than what you are ends, what remains? What has always been here? Pneuma, consciousness, pure being. That sounds simple, and in one sense it is. But it's also the hardest thing, because the entire structure of your psyche has been built around seeking, improving, becoming. To tell the mind, stop seeking, is like telling the heart, stop beating. The mind doesn't know how not to seek. Seeking is what it does. So Gnosis doesn't come through the mind. It comes in spite of the mind. It comes in the spaces between thoughts, in moments of non-doing, in total surrender where you simply allow everything to be as it is, without trying to change, improve, or understand. And here is the final paradox. You cannot make Gnosis happen, but you can remove the obstacles that prevent it from arising naturally. You can't force the sun to rise, but you can open the curtains. Gnostic practices are the opening of curtains. Detachment, discernment, inner silence, refusal to feed archontic dramas. You do what you can, and then you wait. Not a passive wait, but an alert, watchful one. The early Gnostic Christians had a name for this: to watch. Jesus in the Gnostic Gospels constantly says, watch. Stay awake. He wasn't talking about the end of the world in an apocalyptic sense. He was talking about watching one's own consciousness, remaining awake instead of falling into archontic sleepwalking. Most people live on autopilot. They don't choose their responses. They react. A stimulus appears, a conditioned response arises, and they assume that response is themselves. But between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is freedom. To watch is to become aware of that space, to expand it, to live from it rather than from conditioned reactions. This changes everything. Someone insults you. Normally, anger would arise automatically, but if you are watchful, you notice. Words were spoken. Emotional energy is arising in the body. There is an impulse to respond defensively, and in that noticing, you create choice. You can respond, or not. You can respond from clarity, or let it pass. The point is not to suppress anger, it's to not be possessed by it. Every time you do this, you are stepping out of the matrix. Not physically, but ontologically. You are operating from a place the Archons do not control. There is another aspect of Gnosis that must be addressed: the role of Sophia. In the Gnostic myths, Sophia did not abandon her sparks. She is constantly trying to awaken them, constantly sending help. Christ, in the Gnostic context, is not an external savior. He is a manifestation of Sophia, an intrusion of light from the pleroma into the Demiurge's matrix. And Christ does not save through vicarious sacrifice. He saves through example and teaching. He shows how a fully awakened being operates within the matrix without being corrupted by it. He demonstrates that it is possible to be in the world, but not of the world. His miracles are not violations of natural laws. They are demonstrations that there are higher laws than the archontic ones, and when you operate from those higher laws, the impossible becomes possible. But Christ is not unique in the sense of being the only Son of God. He is unique in the sense of being the first to fully awaken within this specific age, and in doing so, he opened a path that others can follow. Every Gnostic is potentially a Christ, a fully awakened pneumatic being operating from full Gnosis. This is not arrogance. It is the central Gnostic truth. Pneuma in you is the same substance as pneuma in Christ, in Buddha, in any awakened being. There is no real hierarchy in the pleroma. There are only different degrees of amnesia or remembrance. So when the Gnostic texts speak of salvation, they are not talking about going to heaven after death. They are talking about awakening now, in this life, in this body. Gnostic salvation is exiting identification with psyche and recognizing pneuma. And that can happen at any moment. It doesn't require years of preparation, elaborate rituals, or approval from external authorities. It requires only a moment of seeing through the veil. There are people who have had near-death experiences and returned transformed. They saw something that made them completely lose the fear of death and gain a radically different perspective on life. That is a kind of gnosis. There are people who have gone through severe psychological crises, what transpersonal psychology calls spiritual emergency, where all identity structures collapse and something new emerges. That too can be gnosis. There are people who simply, in an ordinary moment, saw through the illusion of self and recognized what they truly are. Gnosis does not respect spiritual preparation. It arises when it arises, but you can position yourself to receive it. And the position is this: stop lying to yourself. That is the most radical and most difficult practice. Stop pretending you're happy when you're not. Stop pretending you understand when you don't. Stop pretending to be who you intend to appear to be. That brutal honesty creates a crisis. And from that crisis, if you don't run from it, if you don't anesthetize yourself with distractions, Gnosis can arise. Because you finally stopped defending the false identity. You stood naked before reality. And in that nakedness, Pneuma can be seen because nothing is obscuring it anymore. The Archons hate honesty. They thrive on self-deception, on rationalizations, on comfortable narratives that keep you asleep. Every time you are brutally honest with yourself, you are denying them energy. Know Thyself was inscribed on the Temple of Delphi. It was not an invitation to psychological introspection. It was a Gnostic instruction. Know what you truly are, not what you think you are, not what others say you are, not what you wish to be. See directly, what am I? And when you ask this question with total seriousness, when you truly search, not superficially, but with your entire attention focused on this question, something extraordinary can happen. The question can dissolve. Because the question itself presupposes a separate self that can know another self. But if there is no separation, if the knower and the known are one, then the question makes no sense. And in the fall of that question, what remains is what you have always been. Thank you for watching.